Lorraine Washington stood in the crowded lobby of Metropolitan Trust Bank, her weathered hands gripping a faded envelope against her chest. At 74 years old, her fingers trembled slightly, not from nervousness but from the arthritis that had settled deep into her joints after 5 decades of scrubbing floors and washing dishes in Chicago's South Side restaurants. Her silver hair, natural and proud, was styled in neat braids that framed her dignified face. Despite the worn soles of her comfortable shoes and the twice-mended coat she wore, Lorraine carried herself with unmistakable grace. She had been saving for 8 months. 8 long, grinding months of accepting every extra shift offered, of walking 4 miles instead of taking the CTA bus, of eating rice and beans while her friends enjoyed Sunday dinners at their favorite soul food restaurant. Altogether enough money to finally settle the overdue property taxes on the modest bungalow her late husband Jerome had left her when he passed 9 years ago. That little house on the corner of 73rd and Morgan represented everything: 42 years of marriage, 3 children raised, countless Sunday dinners, and memories that kept her warm on cold Chicago nights when she felt most alone. The bank buzzed with Tuesday morning activity, filled with professionals in crisp suits conducting transactions that Lorraine didn't fully understand. Investment portfolios, commercial accounts, wire transfers. She felt conspicuously out of place among the marble floors and gleaming chrome fixtures, but she had every right to be there. Her money was honest money, earned through dignity and determination, every single dollar accounted for. When her number finally appeared on the digital display, Lorraine approached the counter with her precious envelope. She had no way of knowing that the man in the impeccably tailored navy suit standing 5 customers behind her had been observing her since she walked through the doors, and she certainly couldn't have imagined that the next 15 minutes would alter the course of her life forever. Lorraine placed her envelope on the polished counter before a young bank employee whose nameplate read Trevor Morrison. Account services. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with precisely styled hair and a practiced smile that never quite reached his cold eyes. "Good morning," Lorraine said warmly, her voice carrying the soft Southern accent of her Mississippi childhood. Despite 45 years in Chicago, "I need to deposit this into my account, please. It's for my property taxes." Trevor picked up the envelope with obvious distaste, handling it with just 2 fingers as if it might contaminate him. He peered inside, and his expression immediately soured into something resembling disgust. "Cash," he said, pronouncing the word as though it offended him personally. "You do realize cash deposits of this amount require extensive verification and paperwork?" Lorraine felt warmth creeping into her cheeks. "I apologize, sir. I didn't know there was a problem. I counted it very carefully. 3 times actually. Everything's there." "I'm sure you believe that," Trevor interrupted, speaking slowly and loudly, as if addressing someone intellectually impaired. "But we have strict protocols for deposits like this. Unusual circumstances require unusual scrutiny." "Unusual?" Lorraine's voice grew smaller. She could feel the weight of other customers' attention shifting toward them, their curious and judgmental gazes boring into her back. Trevor sighed with theatrical exasperation and began counting the bills, spreading them across the counter with deliberate disdain. 1s, 5s, 10s, 20s, the tangible evidence of Lorraine's sacrifice and determination. He handled each bill as though it were beneath his dignity. "Mrs. Washington," he said, reading from information displayed on his computer screen, "I see here that you're employed as a kitchen worker and housekeeper." The way he pronounced her occupation made it sound like something shameful, something less than respectable. Lorraine straightened her shoulders, summoning what remained of her pride. "Yes, sir. I've been working in restaurants and cleaning homes for 52 years. Honest work." Trevor's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And where exactly did someone in your position acquire this much cash?" "Our institution has very serious policies regarding suspicious deposits. Money laundering, fraud, elderly exploitation. These are real concerns." "Excuse me?" Lorraine's voice shook now, but with indignation rather than fear. "I earned every single dollar of that money, working double shifts and extra jobs." "I'm trying to save my home. Please don't raise your voice, Mrs. Washington," Trevor said, clearly enjoying the moment. "I'm simply performing my professional duties." Someone in your financial situation suddenly appearing with this amount of cash naturally raises questions. Serious questions. "What do you mean, my situation?" Lorraine repeated, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. "Hot," Humiliating tears threatened to spill. What exactly are you implying? I think you understand perfectly well, Trevor said, lowering his voice to a tone he probably considered discreet, though it carried clearly to everyone nearby. Let's be realistic here. You arrive with wrinkled bills, no appointment, no proper documentation of source. This raises red flags. I have my bank card, Lorraine whispered, her voice barely audible now. I've maintained an account here for 28 years, with a balance that rarely exceeds $150, Trevor noted, clicking through his computer with obvious disdain. And now suddenly you have, he counted quickly, his lips moving silently, $3,400 in cash. Surely you can understand why that appears suspicious. Lorraine felt the floor shifting beneath her feet. Around her, other customers whispered and stared. An elegantly dressed woman with designer sunglasses took a deliberate step away from the line. A businessman in an expensive suit shook his head with visible contempt. The security guard near the entrance had moved closer, his hand resting meaningfully on his belt. I cannot process this deposit, Trevor announced with finality, pushing the money back across the counter toward her. Not without a thorough investigation into the source and legitimacy of these funds. Given your age and your background, it's quite possible someone is exploiting you. Or perhaps you're involved in something you don't fully comprehend. I comprehend just fine, Lorraine managed to say, though her voice cracked with emotion. I understand that you're treating me like a criminal because please don't create a scene. Trevor cut her off sharply. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately. You may return when you have proper documentation proving these funds are legitimate. Receipts, official pay stubs, tax records, something credible. Lorraine's hands trembled violently as she reached for her money. 52 years of backbreaking work, of integrity, of doing everything right, and this was the result. Public humiliation in front of a room full of strangers, treated like a thief or a fool or worse. She turned to leave, tears finally streaming down her weathered cheeks, her carefully saved money clutched in her shaking hands. That's when a voice cut through the murmuring crowd like a knife through silk, cold, controlled, and absolutely lethal in its quiet intensity. Did I just hear what I think I heard? The voice belonged to the man in the navy suit. As he stepped forward, Lorraine noticed details she'd been too distressed to register before. He appeared to be in his late 30s, with dark hair swept back from a face of sharp angles and commanding presence, high cheekbones, a strong jawline, and eyes so intensely dark they seemed to pierce straight through pretense. His suit probably cost more than Lorraine earned in 4 months, and he moved with the absolute confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in his life. Dominic Salvatore hadn't planned on intervening today. He'd come to Metropolitan Trust specifically to meet with the regional director about certain private financial arrangements that required discretion and delicacy. But the moment he'd witnessed the elderly black woman being dismissed and humiliated by that arrogant teller, something fundamental had shifted inside him. Perhaps it was because she reminded him of his own grandmother, Rosa, who'd worked herself to exhaustion in garment factories to keep him fed after his parents were killed. Or perhaps it was simply that Dominic Salvatore had built his considerable empire on certain unshakable principles, and respect for those who worked hard was absolutely paramount among them. Trevor looked up at Dominic, and his face immediately drained of color. Mr. Salvatore, he stammered, his previous arrogance evaporating instantly. I didn't realize you were here. I was simply following. You were simply what? Dominic's voice remained quiet, but there was steel beneath the silk. He positioned himself deliberately between Lorraine and the teller, a physical barrier of protection, publicly humiliating a 74-year-old woman for having the audacity to deposit her own honestly earned money in your bank. Sir, it's standard bank policy for bank policy. Dominic leaned forward slightly, and Trevor actually flinched backward. Tell me, does your precious bank policy specifically involve publicly accusing elderly customers of criminal activity? Does it mandate treating hardworking people like criminals simply because they don't meet your personal standards of appearance or wealth? Lorraine stood frozen, completely uncertain about what was unfolding before her. The man defending her radiated a kind of power she'd never encountered in her 74 years, the kind that made the entire bank fall into absolute silence. Even the other customers were watching now, but with apprehension rather than judgment. Mr. Salvatore, please understand. Trevor tried again desperately. I was only trying to, I understand perfectly. Dominic cut him off with surgical precision. I understand that this woman has been a loyal, paying customer of this institution for nearly 3 decades. I understand that she came here to conduct legitimate business with legitimately earned money. And I understand that you treated her with contempt because you decided she wasn't worthy of your respect. Dominic turned to Lorraine then, and his expression softened in a way that made him look almost gentle. Ma'am, are you all right? Lorraine nodded numbly, unable to find her voice. Up close, she could see the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his eyes held shadows that spoke of things he'd seen and done. Things most people would never understand. There was something genuinely dangerous about him, something that made every instinct whisper warnings. But when those dark eyes looked at her, they held nothing but concern and, surprisingly, genuine anger on her behalf. What's your name? Dominic asked gently. Lorraine Washington, she managed to say, her voice still shaking. I just wanted to deposit my money. I earned it all legally, every single dollar. I have documentation at home if I believe you, Dominic said simply, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Then he turned back to Trevor, and his face hardened into something cold and implacable. Process Mrs. Washington's deposit immediately, Mr. Salvatore. I really don't think I'm not asking you to think, Dominic interrupted with icy precision. I'm telling you to perform your job correctly. Process the deposit. Apologize sincerely to Mrs. Washington, and then you and I are going to have an extended conversation with your supervisor about proper customer service and basic human decency. Trevor's hands visibly shook as he reached for the money Lorraine had been clutching. Yes, sir. Right away, sir. My apologies. Dominic remained stationed at the counter while Trevor processed the deposit, his commanding presence ensuring there would be no further complications or delays. Lorraine stood beside him, still trying to comprehend what had just happened, who this man was, and why he'd chosen to defend her. Thank you, she whispered, barely audible. You didn't have to do that for me. Yes, I did, Dominic replied, his eyes never leaving Trevor, who was fumbling nervously through the deposit process. Nobody should be treated that way. Nobody. Especially not someone who's clearly worked hard and lived right their entire life. You don't even know me, Lorraine said softly. Dominic finally looked at her directly, and his expression was unreadable. I know enough. After the deposit was completed, accompanied by a stammered apology from Trevor that satisfied absolutely no one, Dominic turned to Lorraine with unexpected gentleness. May I walk you out, Mrs. Washington? Lorraine hesitated, her mind racing. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this man was dangerous. The way the bank employees looked at him with barely concealed fear, the way even the security personnel stepped aside when he walked past, this was not an ordinary businessman. But he'd stood up for her when everyone else had either participated in her humiliation or stood by silently. He'd seen her humanity when others had seen only someone to dismiss. Yes, she said quietly. Thank you kindly. As they walked toward the exit, the branch manager rushed out of his office, his face pale with obvious panic. Mr. Salvatore, I had no idea you were here today. If you'd just called ahead, we'll talk, Dominic said coldly, not breaking his stride about properly training your staff to treat every single customer with dignity and respect. Especially the ones who've been loyal to this institution for decades while you've been collecting their fees. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm, and Lorraine had to squint against the sudden light. Her property tax money was safely deposited. She should have felt relieved, victorious even. Instead, she felt shaken, confused, and oddly protected by this dangerous stranger who'd intervened on her behalf. Can I offer you a ride home? Dominic asked, gesturing toward a black Mercedes SUV waiting at the curb. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, clearly private security. Lorraine looked at the vehicle with its tinted windows and imposing presence. Everything about this situation screamed danger and complication. I live quite far, she said hesitantly. Down in Bronzeville. Distance doesn't concern me, Dominic said, and something in his eyes made her believe him completely. Against every bit of common sense and self-preservation instinct, Lorraine found herself nodding. All right then. Thank you, Mr. Salvatore. Dominic, he corrected gently. Please, call me Dominic. The Mercedes was more luxurious than any vehicle Lorraine had ever set foot in. Soft leather seats, pristine interior, and the kind of profound quiet that spoke of serious money and serious power. Dominic sat beside her in the spacious back seat while his security driver navigated through Chicago traffic in complete silence. "You really didn't have to do this," Lorraine said again, clutching her purse nervously in her lap. "I could have managed the bus ride just fine. 4 miles in this heat." Dominic glanced at her. "At your age? Absolutely not." Lorraine was quiet for a moment, then her natural curiosity overcame her nervousness. "Mr. Dominic, if you don't mind my asking, why did that bank employee look so terrified of you?" Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I have extensive business interests that make me influential in certain circles throughout Chicago." "What kind of business exactly?" "Import and export operations," Dominic said smoothly. "Real estate development, commercial investments, restaurant ventures, various enterprises." It wasn't exactly a lie. He did own legitimate restaurants, construction companies, and commercial properties scattered throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. He just happened to also control most of the organized crime operations across the entire Midwest region. But something about Lorraine Washington made him want to be, if not completely honest, at least not entirely dishonest. "You must be extraordinarily successful," Lorraine observed carefully. "I've been fortunate," Dominic replied. "No," Lorraine said with surprising firmness. "Successful. There's an important difference between the two. Fortune is what happens to you randomly. Success is what you deliberately create through effort and choices." Dominic found himself smiling despite the circumstances. "That's a remarkably wise distinction. I've had 70 for years to figure these things out," Lorraine said, then hesitantly added, "Can I ask you something else?" "Of course. Why did you help me? Really and truly. You don't know anything about me. I'm nobody particularly important." Dominic turned to look at her fully, and Lorraine was struck by the genuine intensity in those dark eyes. "You're completely wrong about that. You're not nobody. You're a woman who managed to save $3,400 on a housekeeper's and kitchen worker's salary. That requires extraordinary discipline and character that most people I encounter don't possess." Lorraine felt tears threatening again, but these were fundamentally different. "That's very kind of you to say. It's simply the truth," Dominic replied firmly. "My grandmother Rosa raised me alone. She worked 3 different jobs simultaneously: garment factories, taking in laundry, cleaning offices at night. Whatever was necessary to keep food on our table and clothes on my back." "When I saw that teller treating you that way," his hands clenched into fists involuntarily, "it reminded me viscerally of every single time someone looked down on her because she worked with her hands instead of sitting behind a desk." "What happened to her?" Lorraine asked softly. "She died when I was 20 years old," Dominic said, his voice going flat and distant. "Massive heart attack while scrubbing floors in some lawyer's office building. She was 62. I'm deeply sorry." "So am I," Dominic said quietly. "Every single day of my life." They sat in contemplative silence for several moments, watching Chicago's South Side streets pass by outside the tinted windows. Then Dominic asked, "What about you? What do you need $3,400 for?" "If you don't mind me asking." "Overdue property taxes," Lorraine explained. "On my house. My husband Jerome left it to me when he passed 9 years ago. It's literally all I have left of him, of our life together. If I didn't pay those taxes by next Friday, the city was going to auction it off. So I've been saving everything I could, taking every extra shift offered, walking instead of taking the bus. Whatever was necessary. You shouldn't have to work that hard at your age," Dominic said, and there was genuine anger threading through his voice. Lorraine laughed, though without much real humor. "She doesn't pay property taxes or put food on the table, Dominic. I do what I have to do to survive. Just like my grandmother," Dominic murmured. The Mercedes pulled smoothly up in front of a small but well-maintained bungalow in Bronzeville. It was modest by any standard, but clearly loved flowers blooming in neat window boxes, a freshly swept front porch, paint that showed recent care and attention. This house represented absolutely everything Lorraine had worked for: stability, independence, dignity, a place that was genuinely hers. "This is me," Lorraine said, reaching for the door handle. She paused, turning back. "Dominic, I truly don't know how to properly thank you for what you did today." "No thanks necessary," Dominic interrupted gently. "But Mrs. Washington, Lorraine, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Would you allow me to help you further?" "I have extensive connections throughout the city. I could arrange better paying work, safer neighborhoods, Opportunities no, Lorraine said firmly, surprising even herself with her decisiveness. I genuinely appreciate the offer. Truly I do. But I've made it this far on my own terms and my own merit. I won't start accepting charity now. Not even from someone as kind as you've been to me today. Dominic studied her for a long moment, then nodded with what looked unmistakably like respect. I understand completely, but will you at least take my personal number? Just in case you ever need anything at all. Not charity, just someone who owes you a debt. You don't owe me anything, Lorraine protested. You reminded me why I do what I do, Dominic said somewhat cryptically. That's worth more than you could possibly know. Lorraine accepted the card he offered. It was simple and elegant, just a name and phone number, no company name, no title, nothing else. As she climbed carefully out of the Mercedes, Dominic called after her. Lorraine, that bank teller will be looking for new employment by this evening, and the branch manager will be making a substantial donation to a charity supporting elderly workers. Lorraine turned back, eyes widening. You can actually do that? Dominic's smile was cold and sharp. I can do quite a lot of things, Lorraine. Some of them are even completely legal. The attempt at humor fell flat as Lorraine suddenly understood with perfect clarity. This man who'd defended her, who'd treated her with such genuine respect, who reminded her of good people she'd known throughout her life, he was also profoundly dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Who are you really, Dominic? She asked quietly. Someone who believes absolutely in respect, Dominic answered carefully. And someone who never forgets either kindness or cruelty. As the Mercedes drove away, Lorraine stood on her front porch, Dominic's card clutched in her weathered hand. She should throw it away immediately. She should forget this entire surreal encounter ever happened. But something told her with absolute certainty that Dominic Salvatore had just become part of her life in ways she couldn't yet begin to understand. Lorraine didn't call Dominic. 4 weeks passed, and his card remained tucked safely in her purse, a tangible reminder of a surreal afternoon that felt increasingly dreamlike with each passing day. She returned to her familiar routine, cleaning houses, working kitchen shifts at the restaurant, riding the bus, carefully counting her pennies. The only real difference was that whenever she passed Metropolitan Trust Bank, she deliberately crossed the street to avoid it. She'd opened a new account at a small community bank where the tellers actually treated her like a human being with dignity. But life, as it often does, had different plans entirely. On a warm Thursday afternoon, Lorraine was working at the Patterson residence, a sprawling mansion in the Gold Coast that paid her enough to cover 2 weeks of groceries. Mrs. Patterson was hosting some elaborate charity fundraiser, and Lorraine had been hired to help with event preparations. She was in the expansive kitchen carefully arranging hors d'oeuvres on silver platters when she heard the doorbell chime. Mrs. Patterson's excited voice carried clearly from the marble foyer. Mr. Salvatore, how absolutely wonderful that you could attend. Your generous donation to the Arts Education Foundation is simply incredible. Lorraine's hands froze mid-movement. It couldn't possibly be the same Salvatore. It was a relatively common Italian surname, surely. Lorraine. She turned slowly, a tray of canapés trembling slightly in her hands, to find Dominic Salvatore standing in the kitchen doorway. He wore a charcoal gray suit today, looking every inch the powerful, successful businessman. But his expression, surprised, almost genuinely delighted, was entirely authentic. Dominic, she breathed. What on earth are you doing here? I could ask you exactly the same question, he said, stepping into the kitchen. Behind him, Mrs. Patterson hovered anxiously, clearly confused and intrigued by this unexpected interaction. I work here, Lorraine said simply. I'm helping prepare for the event. You to know each other? Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice bright with barely contained curiosity and calculation. She was the type of woman who collected important connections the way others collected expensive artwork. We've met previously, Dominic said smoothly, not taking his eyes off Lorraine. Mrs. Washington assisted me with an important matter recently. I've been hoping to repay that kindness. That was an extremely generous interpretation of their actual encounter, Lorraine thought. Before she could formulate a response, Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands together with obvious delight. How absolutely wonderful. Lorraine dear, why don't you take a well-deserved break? I'm certain Mr. Salvatore would appreciate your company while I attend to the other arriving guests. it wasn't really a suggestion or request. Mrs. Patterson practically shepherded them toward the back terrace, clearly thrilled to have facilitated some mysterious connection between her hired help and one of Chicago's most influential and generous philanthropists. Alone on the spacious terrace overlooking an immaculate garden, with the sounds of the gathering party a distant murmur, Lorraine finally spoke. "You don't have to do this. I'm working right now. I'm not doing anything," Dominic said easily, "except having a conversation with someone I'm genuinely pleased to see." He paused meaningfully. "You didn't call." "No," Lorraine admitted. "I didn't think it would be appropriate." "Why not?" Lorraine studied him carefully. In the afternoon sunlight, she could see details she'd missed before: a faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his dark eyes held shadows that spoke eloquently of things he'd witnessed, decisions he'd made, actions he'd taken. "Because I'm not stupid or naive, Dominic. I understand what you are. And what am I?" His voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "Dangerous," Lorraine said quietly but firmly. "Powerful. Someone who operates in a world I don't understand and frankly don't want to be part of." "You're not wrong," Dominic acknowledged without hesitation. "But does that fundamental truth change the fact that I respect you? That I genuinely appreciate what you represent?" "What exactly do I represent to you?" Lorraine asked, genuinely curious about his answer. Dominic was silent for a long moment, leaning against the terrace railing, looking out over the manicured garden. "Dignity," he finally said. "Honesty. The kind of real strength that comes from choosing to work hard and live right, even when it would be infinitely easier not to. Integrity that can't be purchased." "You could have all those qualities too," Lorraine observed carefully, "if you chose different work, a different path." "It's far too late for me," Dominic said. And there was something in his voice, regret perhaps, or resigned acceptance. "I made my choices a very long time ago. But that doesn't mean I can't recognize genuine worth when I encounter it." Before Lorraine could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from inside the house. Shouting, the sharp sound of breaking glass, a woman's terrified scream. Dominic's entire demeanor transformed in an instant. The philosophical man beside her vanished completely, replaced by someone cold, calculating, and absolutely lethal. He pulled out his phone, pressed a single button. "Marcus. Situation at the Patterson residence. Get everyone here immediately." Then he turned to Lorraine, his expression intense and commanding. "Stay here. Don't go inside under any circumstances." "What's happening?" "Stay here," Dominic repeated with unmistakable force. Then he was moving swift, purposeful, dangerous into the house. Lorraine's heart pounded violently. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to protect herself from whatever was unfolding. But Mrs. Patterson was inside, along with her guests and staff, and despite everything, despite all the danger, Lorraine couldn't simply abandon them. She followed Dominic inside. The scene in the great room was absolute chaos. 5 men in dark masks had burst through the front entrance. They carried guns, real guns. Lorraine had never seen actual firearms before outside of television. Mrs. Patterson was pressed against the wall, her wealthy guests cowering in terror. The masked men were demanding jewelry, cash, anything valuable. And Dominic stood calmly in the center of it all, utterly composed and in complete control. "You have exactly 5 seconds to leave this house," he said, his voice carrying absolute, unquestionable authority. One of the masked intruders laughed nervously. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" "I'm the reason you're about to experience the worst day of your entire lives," Dominic replied evenly. 4 seconds remaining. "He's bluffing," another gunman said uncertainly. "He's not even armed." The front door burst open violently. 7 men in dark suits poured in with military precision, Dominic's security team. They moved with practiced coordination, weapons drawn but not yet discharged. The would-be robbers found themselves completely surrounded within seconds. "Put down your weapons," Dominic commanded, his face an emotionless mask, face down on the floor. Right now, the authority in his voice left absolutely no room for argument or negotiation. The gunmen complied immediately, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. If you believe respect should transcend all boundaries of age, race, and circumstance, subscribe to this channel and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Lorraine's situation? Your stories matter to this community. Margaret watched from the kitchen doorway, her hand pressed firmly against her mouth in shock. This was Dominic Salvatore's real-world violence barely contained, absolute power exercised without hesitation, life and death decisions made in mere seconds. This was the truth she'd suspected but hadn't fully comprehended until this very moment. After the police arrived and took the gunmen away in handcuffs, after statements were given and questions answered, Mrs. Patterson threw herself at Dominic, sobbing with overwhelming relief. "You saved us. You saved all of us. How can I ever possibly repay you?" "No repayment necessary," Dominic said, gently but firmly extracting himself from her emotional grip. His eyes found Lorraine across the crowded room, and something unguarded flashed across his face. "I'm just grateful everyone's safe," but Lorraine saw the deeper truth in his eyes. He'd been terrified not for himself, but specifically for her. He'd seen her follow him inside despite his explicit orders, and for just one unguarded moment, his carefully constructed facade had cracked completely open. Later, after the police finished their extensive questioning and the traumatized guests had been sent home, Dominic found Lorraine in the kitchen. She was methodically cleaning up broken glass, her hands shaking noticeably. "You didn't listen to me," he said quietly. "No," Lorraine agreed without looking up. "I don't follow orders particularly well. It's a lifelong personality flaw." Dominic almost smiled, but the expression died quickly. His face turned deadly serious. "Lorraine, those men weren't random opportunistic criminals. This was a carefully targeted operation. Against you specifically? Against anyone and everyone associated with me," Dominic confirmed grimly. "My enemies knew I'd be attending this event. They wanted to send me a very clear message about vulnerability." Lorraine set down the dustpan and turned to face him directly. "And you're telling me this because why exactly?" "Because you need to understand completely what being connected to me actually means," Dominic said with intense urgency. "It means constant danger. It means perpetual risk. It means your life could be in serious jeopardy simply because someone saw you talking to me, associating with me." "Then why did you approach me at that bank?" Lorraine asked pointedly. "Because I couldn't help myself," Dominic admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Because seeing you being treated that way made me angrier than I've felt in years." "Because," he stopped himself abruptly. "Because what?" "I don't know, Lorraine," Dominic said, and he sounded genuinely lost. "I honestly don't know what I'm doing or why I can't seem to stay away." Lorraine studied this powerful, dangerous man who suddenly looked almost vulnerable, almost human. "You're trying to be good," she said softly. "In a world and a life that doesn't allow for goodness." "Something like that," Dominic murmured. "You should go," Lorraine said firmly. "Your world and my world, they don't mix. They can't mix." Today proved that absolutely. "You're completely right," Dominic agreed. But he didn't move. He just stood there, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "But Lorraine," he continued, "if you ever need anything at all, you call me. Promise me that much." "I can't promise that," Lorraine said. "Because calling you means deliberately inviting your world into mine. And I've worked far too hard for far too long to have everything I've built destroyed by violence and danger." "I understand," Dominic said, and the words seemed to physically hurt him. He nodded slowly, accepting her decision. "Take care of yourself, Lorraine Washington." "You too, Dominic Salvatore." As Dominic left, Lorraine felt something tighten painfully in her chest. She'd done the right thing, the safe thing, the smart thing, the only rational thing. So why did it feel so profoundly wrong? 3 weeks later, Lorraine's carefully ordered world shattered completely. She'd been walking home from a late cleaning job when it happened with terrifying speed. 4 men grabbed her right outside her own house, forcing her roughly into a waiting van before she could even draw breath to scream. She woke up in a cold warehouse, tied securely to a metal chair, her head pounding with pain. Finally awake, a harsh voice said. A man stepped into the harsh, light, middle-aged, expensive tailored suit, eyes as cold as winter ice. "Mrs. Washington, or should I say Dominic Salvatore's newest little pet project." "I don't know what you're talking about," Lorraine said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Don't play stupid with me," the man snapped viciously. "We know Salvatore has taken a personal interest in you. You've been seen with him multiple times. That makes you extremely valuable leverage." "I'm nobody," Lorraine protested desperately. "I'm just a housekeeper, a kitchen worker, your leverage," the man interrupted coldly. "And Salvatore is going to pay dearly to get you back alive, or watch you die slowly. Either way, He'll learn that crossing Vincent Marconi has severe consequences. Lorraine's blood ran absolutely cold. She'd been right to distance herself from Dominic. She'd known instinctively that his world was dangerous, but she'd never imagined it would reach out and grab her anyway, pull her into darkness against her will. For hours she sat in that chair, terrified and freezing cold. Her captors made videos threatening, violent videos clearly meant for Dominic. They hit her, not enough to cause serious injury, but enough to make their point brutally clear, to show they were serious. Lorraine had faced significant hardship before in her 74 years poverty, discrimination, loss, grief, but never terror like this. Never the certainty that she might actually die far from home, alone and afraid. She thought about her late husband Jerome, about the life they'd built together through hard work and love, about the house she'd fought so hard to keep, about the simple, honest existence she'd maintained for 7 decades. And she thought about Dominic, the dangerous, complicated man who'd shown her respect when no one else would, who'd seen her humanity when others saw only someone to dismiss or exploit. Then she heard it, distant at first, then closer, gunfire, shouting. The warehouse exploded into violent chaos. The door burst open with explosive force, and Dominic stormed in like an avenging angel, his face a mask of absolute fury unlike anything Lorraine had ever witnessed. Behind him, his team moved with lethal military efficiency, quickly subduing Marconi's guards with brutal precision. "Get away from her." Dominic's voice was a roar that made even hardened criminals visibly flinch. What happened next was too fast for Lorraine to fully process or comprehend. Dominic moved through Marconi's men like a force of pure nature. There was violence, controlled, purposeful, absolutely ruthless violence that spoke of years of training and experience. And then he was there, cutting her bonds with swift efficiency, lifting her carefully into his arms as though she weighed nothing. "I've got you," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. I've got you. You're safe." Lorraine couldn't speak. She just buried her face against his chest and let the tears come freely, all the terror and relief flooding out at once. Later, in the back of the Mercedes, wrapped securely in Dominic's jacket, Lorraine finally found her voice. "How did you find me?" "I've had security watching your house since the Patterson incident," Dominic admitted without hesitation. "I knew Marconi would try something eventually. I just didn't know exactly when." His jaw clenched visibly. "I should have protected you better." "This is my fault." "This isn't your fault," Lorraine said firmly. "Yes, it is," Dominic countered intensely. "I put you at risk the moment I involved myself in your life. I should have stayed away from you completely. But you didn't," Lorraine observed quietly. "No," Dominic agreed softly. "I didn't." They sat in heavy silence for several moments. Then Lorraine asked, "What happens now? To those men? To Marconi?" "You don't want to know," Dominic said flatly. "You're right," Lorraine acknowledged. "I don't." She looked at him directly. "Dominic, I can't keep living in constant fear because someone might use me to hurt you. I can't live like that." "I know," Dominic said. "That's why I'm giving you a real choice." "What kind of choice?" Dominic turned to face her fully, his expression serious and open. "I can set you up somewhere completely safe. New identity, new city, enough money that you'll never have to work another day in your life. You'll be entirely disconnected from me, from my world. You'll be safe." "And the other option?" Lorraine asked, though she already suspected the answer. "You stay," Dominic said simply, "under my complete protection. In my world. It means bodyguards, armored vehicles, living in one of my secure properties. It means accepting that danger will always be somewhere nearby. But so will I." Lorraine was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities. It was an impossible choice: safety and anonymity, or danger and what? A strange friendship with a mob boss. The protection and attention of a man who lived in darkness but somehow looked at her like she represented light itself. "I won't run," Lorraine finally said with conviction. "I've lived in Chicago for 45 years. I buried my husband here. I have friends. A community, a whole life. I won't let fear take that away from me, Lorraine." But she continued firmly, "I also won't lie to myself about what you are or what your life truly means. If I stay, if I accept your protection, I need to know the complete truth. All of it. No more polite fictions about import-export businesses." Dominic studied her for a long, intense moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he nodded. "All right, the truth. I control most organized crime operations throughout the Midwest. Drugs, gambling, construction rackets, labor unions, political corruption. If there's money in it and it's illegal, I have significant involvement. I've killed people. I've ordered executions. I've made decisions that would put me in federal prison for multiple lifetimes if anyone could prove them." He paused, watching her face carefully for judgment or disgust. "I'm not a good man, Lorraine. I try to have honor, to protect those who can't protect themselves, to follow certain codes. But I'm still a criminal, a very dangerous one. Are you trying to scare me away?" Lorraine asked. "Yes," Dominic admitted. "Because you deserve so much better than this." "Better than me?" Lorraine reached out and took his hand, surprising them both with the gesture. "Maybe I do deserve better," she agreed. "But sometimes we don't get what we deserve. We get what we choose. And I'm choosing to believe that a man who stood up for an elderly woman in a bank, who respects the dignity of honest work, who was absolutely terrified I'd been hurt, that man has something genuinely worth believing in." "You're making a serious mistake," Dominic said, his voice rough with emotion. "Maybe," Lorraine said, "but it's my mistake to make. And Dominic, I've spent 74 years playing it safe, doing what was expected. Maybe it's time I did something reckless for once in my life." For the first time since Lorraine had met him, Dominic Salvatore smiled, truly smiled, with genuine warmth and something that looked remarkably like hope. "Then I promise you this," he said. "No one will ever disrespect you again. No one will ever make you feel small or worthless. And no one, absolutely no one, will ever lay a hand on you while I'm alive." "That's a dangerous promise," Lorraine observed. "I'm a dangerous man," Dominic replied. "But for you, I'll be whatever you need me to be." As the Mercedes pulled up to one of Dominic's secure properties, a beautiful renovated brownstone in a quiet, safe neighborhood, Lorraine looked at the man beside her. He was wrong about one thing, she thought. He was a good man, just trapped in a bad life. And maybe, just maybe, she could remind him of that truth. "Dominic," she said as they climbed out of the vehicle. "Yes, thank you for respecting me enough to tell me the complete truth." Dominic helped her up the front steps, his hand gentle and steady on her elbow. "Thank you for trusting me despite knowing it." Inside, the brownstone was warm and furnished with understated elegance. Dominic showed Lorraine to a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. "Comfortable, beautiful, safe. Rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow we'll figure out everything else. Security details, routines, whatever makes you feel comfortable and secure. This is your home now, for as long as you want it, Dominic," Lorraine called as he turned to leave. "Yes, your grandmother Rosa would be proud of you, not necessarily for what you do, but for who you are underneath it all." Dominic stood completely still for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in years." After he left, Lorraine sat on the edge of the elegant bed, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. She'd just agreed to accept protection from a mob boss, to live in his world, to place her trust in a man who'd just admitted to crimes that would shock most people. But she'd also seen his fury when he'd found her captured, his gentleness as he'd cut her free, his respect when he'd told her difficult truths instead of comforting lies. Maybe she was a foolish old woman. Maybe this would all end badly, as dangerous things often do. But for the first time in 9 years since Jerome's death, Lorraine Washington felt truly seen, truly valued, truly protected. And that was worth the risk. 6 months later, afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows of Dominic's downtown office. Lorraine sat comfortably in a leather chair, working on her laptop. Yes, a laptop at 75. She'd decided it was time to embrace technology. Dominic had hired a patient tutor, and Lorraine had discovered she genuinely enjoyed it. She now oversaw Dominic's charitable foundations, his community investments, his efforts to, in her words, do something decent with all that money. She'd become his conscience, his connection to the values his grandmother had taught him. There was a knock. Marcus entered with a young woman, a new restaurant employee. "Boss," Marcus said, "we have a situation. Keisha here says her manager is stealing and threatened her job if she reported it." Lorraine stood immediately, walking over to the frightened woman. "Come sit down, sweetheart. Tell us everything. You did exactly the right thing coming here." As Keisha explained, Lorraine watched Dominic's face. She saw the fury there, not at the theft, but at the abuse of power, at someone making a young worker feel helpless. "Here's what's going to happen," Dominic said firmly. That manager will be fired today. You'll be promoted with a raise. And Keisha, if anyone in any of my businesses ever makes you feel threatened again, you come directly to me. Understood? After Keisha left, grateful and tearful, Lorraine smiled. Rosa would be proud. You keep saying that, Dominic observed. Because it's true. They worked in comfortable silence. Then Dominic asked, do you regret it? Accepting my protection? Living in this world? Lorraine considered carefully. Her life was different, now more complicated. Sometimes dangerous, always unconventional. But she'd helped open community centers, establish scholarships, create real opportunities. And she'd found something unexpected, genuine friendship, connection, purpose. No, Lorraine said. I don't regret it. Do you regret helping me that day? Dominic looked at her, his expression soft. That was the best decision I've made in years, even though I make you donate thousands to charity monthly, Lorraine teased. Especially because of that, Dominic confirmed. You make me better, Lorraine. You remind me that power should protect, not just control. Well, someone has to keep you honest, Lorraine said with a warm smile. It's a work in progress, Dominic agreed. If this story touched your heart, we'd be honored if you'd subscribe to our channel and become part of this community. Share your own stories in the comments, times when someone showed you unexpected respect, or when you stood up for someone who needed it. Your experiences inspire others and remind us all that dignity, respect, and human connection transcend every boundary. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. We'll see you in the next story.